Welcome. Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Gnostic Studies. And today we'd like to continue our Gnostic Runology series with part 6, Historical Precursors, early 1900s. But as usual, before we get into today's material, we need to do a quick review of what we studied in the past class, so that we can keep the continuity. So this is the handout, which in this case is not a summary of the material that we read, but is just a copy of everything that we read, just a PDF version. We talked about the 3 factors that are related to this Völkisch movement and kind of how things are emerging in the German-speaking world, which we saw, or the 3 contributing, I don't know if factors is the right word, but it's the 3 contributing forces, which we said were the spiritualist movement, the odic force, and Theosophy. And Theosophy was what we looked at last class. Theosophy is something that Blavatsky started with a few other people, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. And it was something that people still study today and that still has value. Kind of maybe the beginning of the New Age movement, as some people see it, although we believe that there's other things that were the genuine beginning, but certainly the beginning of it becoming popular in the world, internationally. Because Blavatsky went to Tibet, and there she supposedly learned another language and was able to translate some books out of that language into Western language, such as English, and then she published a book, and then they sold out very quickly. So she realized that it was going to be popular. They printed some more. The first edition of 1,000 copies sold out in 1 week. So then she decided, they're going to do other things like a magazine, and then there's different groups popping up all over the world, and they started calling them, like when they had a group of people, they would call it a Theosophical lodge, which, as we mentioned, is a Masonic terminology. So we can see kind of that transition from what was Masonic before into a normalizing of certain terms. And in her documents, in her books and magazines, she was talking about how all religions are similar, and that there is, underlying all of them, the existence of an ancient wisdom religion that's a sort of a occult guide to the cosmos, to nature, and to human life. And that idea that there's this unity under everything was somewhat popular at that time in the late 1800s with those who were interested in those things. And we could say it's still something that people are interested in. And, obviously that's why we find the word gnosis and research that word, because it also talks about the same thing. But what became important for us in terms of Theosophy was that we can see in the German-speaking world, when Theosophy came into the German language, that is, they started translating her book and started printing a magazine and started, presenting ideas in the same vein that there's Völkisch ideas that emerge. Remember, we defined the Völkisch movement as sort of a German language group that were saying, this is us, we're the folk, because Volk means folk, the people, we're those people, and we have something special. And, this is not something that's unique to Germanic culture or European culture, right? Every culture has these same concepts within them, that they're special, that they have special knowledge or esoteric knowledge. And what's nice in the times we live in is that we're able to study them all and look at them all, or a lot of them, most of them. And, maybe some of them are still inaccessible, like in Eastern languages, but we can definitely study a lot of them and get something out of it. So the Völkisch movement kind of is already popular. This idea that Nordic mythology, the ancestors of what we call Germanic peoples, had something special that they want to talk about, that they want to study. So people are studying it. And then that merges with this Theosophical popularity, and it becomes something unique, because it wasn't, the Völkisch movement is the name of the type of sort of romantic nationalism that's particular to that region and that time period. As the Völkisch movement progresses, it starts to take on certain ideas that are sort of like, not only are we special, but also other people are not as good as us. And taking on racial and ethnic purity tones, which we see manifesting with Hitler's book from 1925, where he says, the basic ideas of the National Socialist movement are populist, or Völkisch, and the Völkisch ideas are National Socialist. So now this thing that was the Völkisch movement, 30, 40 years before, when Theosophy is coming about, is now being hijacked in order to become essentially parallel or the same as the Nazi, which is National Socialist movement. So that's why we want to be aware of all these things, because we want to see the progress, the progression, because, maybe similar things are going on now. That terms are being used and people are trying to direct and take popular ideas and aim them in another direction for their own benefit, not necessarily for the benefit of humanity. So this brings us to this term Aryan, because the way that Blavatsky used it in the Theosophical movement was different than how it's used in how actually people even still use it, and how it was used by the Nazi movement, and how it became used in early 1900s in Germany. But before that happened, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, and if you go and look at the older documents that are, 1800s, Aryan was a name that was given to the races and the peoples that lived in India and Persia, sort of those people from a long, long time ago in those regions. But then it converted into being used by, I believe it was a French guy in the 1950s. He converted it into being used to mean European or white race. And we talked a bit about what happened with this, that this is, it happens over decades. It's not something that just like, oh, we're changing the meaning of this word, but this guy, Victor Rydberg, he says, oh, he's going to use Aryan in this particular way. I have adopted the last designation, that it means Indo-Germanic, Indo-European, not Hindu or Iranian, Persian or Armenian, which he calls, that's Asiatic Aryans versus European Aryans. So they're starting to make their own definitions in order to justify their way of doing things and their way of seeing things. Because then you got it defined, Aryan is defined a certain way. You look at some old document or maybe even a temple or a museum or a statue or something that maybe uses that word, and it means something different than the original meaning, than the objective meaning, because now you've changed the word to mean your group. Blavatsky used the term when she talked about the different root races. She said that there were 7 root races and that everyone on the planet was of the 5th root race. Well, technically she says there are some people that are descendant from I think the 4th root race or other root races prior. But the majority of people, she said, I think something like, she mentioned like colors, and she said it was dark to light to creamy. But it's not quoted on this document. That everyone, or the majority of people on the planet in this time, belong to the Aryan, so-called Aryan root race, which is what the same way that Gnosis looks at it as well. So all that to get us to this point so that we can read today's material and understand in context what's going on. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comments area. We're just going to keep cranking here, because now it starts to get, in my opinion, a little bit more interesting now that we understand the context. We're looking at the early 1900s. We see in the 1800s that Theosophy, the later 1800s, Theosophy is merging with these other factors. Spiritualist movement, the Odic force, Reichenbach's Odic force. And now Theosophy and the Völkisch movement are starting to intertwine in a very particular way that's unique to the culture and the time period, in order to, start to use ancient symbols and things that are mystical. But then at some point, it starts to deviate. We start to lose the original meaning, or the meaning that was presented in the Theosophical movement, at least. So the intermingling of the Theosophical movement and the Völkisch movement in the 1890s leads to a unique environment. With the Völkisch movement, we have an interest in Nordic mythology, religion, the runes, etc. With the Theosophical movement, we see an interest in Eastern philosophy, ancient mythology, comparative religion, yoga, fakirism, esotericism, and occultism. Now these two start to blend in a way that allows the runes, via the Völkisch movement, to connect with the mystical from Theosophy. And later we'll see how Reichenbach's idea of the Odic force will also merge to sustain the runic exercises, the study of which is the object of this course. Right? We really want to understand these runic exercises, but we need to understand them in context and be able to talk about them. The first German Theosophical Society was established in July of 1884 by Wilhelm Hub Schleden. Between 1886 and 1895, he published a magazine, a periodical called The Sphinx, a German periodical. And this had a small version of the Theosophical logo, which included a swastika under the Sphinx's face. Soon thereafter, in Vienna, a Theosophical Society was founded in 1887, whose members included Franz Hartmann and a young Rudolf Steiner. In 1893, Hartmann began a periodical of his own, which was the first German publication to clearly use the Theosophical swastika on its cover. Hartmann's periodical, Lotus Blossoms, was published for 7 years. During this time, he became president of another German Theosophical Society, which is a branch of the International Theosophical Brotherhood, when it was established in 1896, while American Theosophists, including William Q. Judge, were traveling through Europe. A little later, Rudolf Steiner was made General Secretary of the same branch in 1902. We got a question here. I'm wondering if sigils have a correlation to runes. It's a good question. Hartmann's magazine seems to have motivated another German, Paul Zillmann, to found the New Metaphysical Review. The New Metaphysical Review in 1896. According to a very interesting group that you can click on if you follow this link, the International Association for the Preservation of Spiritualist and Occult Periodicals. This group has a lot of periodicals in different languages, old magazines. And they said about Paul Zillmann's New Metaphysical Review, the journal was a who's who of German metaphysics and mysticism and of contemporary New Thought. It had very close relationships with the English-speaking world, especially with the Metaphysical magazine. It published articles from Rama Prasad, Blavatsky, and other Theosophists, as well as up-and-coming German authors such as Perit Schuh and Guido von List, whose books Zillmann also published. Zillmann was a leading German theosophist and published translations of many English-language theosophical texts into German, often translated by his wife. In this magazine, a Völkisch article is published in 1906 that becomes somewhat of a focal point for the runic studies in German-speaking countries. Okay, so here's a little summary of what we've been talking about. 1884, the first German Theosophical Society is established. 1885, Theosophical magazine, The Sphinx, is published. 1887, a second German Theosophical Society is established, which include Franz Hartmann and Rudolf Steiner among its members. 1893, another German magazine, Theosophical magazine called Lotus Blossoms, is published by Hartmann. It also has a Theosophical logo with a swastika. 1896, a third German Theosophical magazine, the New Metaphysical Review, is published by Paul Zillmann, additionally incorporating the Theosophical logo with a swastika. So the swastika has a connotation that begins in 1885 being associated with Theosophy, with a six-pointed star, a snake biting its tail. So that's a full 40 years before Hitler publishes his book, and another, we could say, couple years, additional years before Nazism really takes over in Germany. So we're just trying to draw attention to the idea that this symbol of the swastika has a history in German-speaking countries for over 40 years. And it's associated with metaphysical things, with theosophical things. And those are associated with the Völkisch movement and with just international mysticism, like the root religion, or all these different things are coming together. In 1906, the Metaphysical Review publishes Guido von List's article, "The Mystery or Secret of the Runes." It published in multiple parts beginning in January of 1906. Okay, so now we found a review of this article of Guido von List's article, because we'll see that he becomes sort of the big boy in the German-speaking world talking about runes. In June 1906, right, so 6 months later, in the June 1906 issue of the Theosophist, an English-language theosophical magazine that was published in India, some other theosophical magazines are reviewed, including those published in French, Spanish, and the German languages. The relevant German magazine review is below. The New Metaphysical Review, edited by Paul Zillman from Berlin, this journal has, in consequence of its solid contents, conquered a unique position in Germany, being the only journal connected with Theosophy which has many subscribers other than Theosophists, and the only one which may be found in the reading room of almost every university. The first number of the new set is dedicated to Edward von Hartmann, the greatest of the living European philosophers. The second article, The Secret of the Runes by Guido von List, is likewise highly interesting, although too bold, as it seems to us, in many of its particulars. The runes are said to be hieroglyphics of the original, not Germanic, but Indo-European language, and an explanation of the current ones of them, besides which there exist many hundreds used now as ornaments or auspicious signs only, is given from the Havamal. That's one of the most wonderful books of the rich old Icelandic culture, the main contents of which are, so to say, the Mahabodhi of Odhin, Wotan. So now he's mixing Maha and Bodhi, and then Odin, or Wotan, a Germanic term, i.e. the knowledge attained to by the dying father of the gods at the time of the beginning, pralaya, of this world. Gotterdämmerung, that all life is a sacrifice brought to himself by himself. The word runes, runir, runar, is often used in exactly the sense of the Indian mantra. It may be noticed here that the parallels to old Indian literature are so numerous and close, not only in the Havamal, but in the whole old Icelandic literature, which is the only pure, i.e. unchristian, old Germanic literature preserved to us, that a complete systematical comparison of the two literatures would certainly evoke the greatest surprise in Europe as well as India, and would probably give the proof to every unprejudiced mind that the Germanic nations, Scandinavians, Danes, Germans, etc., if they had been spared the disturbing influence of the Christian Church, would have developed to the spiritual height of India in the dark Middle Ages. So obviously that last sentence was extremely long, but you can see he's bigging it up, right? He's hyping it up. And you see the type of language. This is in English, talking about a German language thing. So imagine how it was hidden there over in Germany at that time. If it's in every university, almost every university, as, you know, like a kind of progressive magazine. Despite the Theosophical author's critique of Guido von List's article as being too bold, Guido von List's acclaim in the German-speaking world, and especially in Völkisch circles, was pretty significant. However, before Guido von List's popularity, we have some very interesting observations on the runes by a man named Friedrich Fischbach, who was a German textile designer by profession. The reason that we want to bring this to your attention is that actually, and we mentioned this before, but when we were doing some research, we found a comment in an article or in a book seller website that said that Guido von List's, it was in, all of it is in German, I had to run it through the translator, but the translator program, but it said Guido von List copied this other guy, Friedrich Fischbach, and that his main ideas come from there. So we were able to find the book, which you see here, and which is, still accessible on Google Books. You can get the whole book. Of course, it's in German, but we were able to run some of it through the translator and look at it and see what it had to say, and it's very interesting. I don't know if I'd say that Guido von List, copied everything, but it certainly appears that he was influenced by it. So this guy, Fischbach, we're going to look at him today. I think you'll like him. In 1862, Fischbach moved to Vienna, where he was a decorator and designer. While there, he prepared drawings for the collection of pattern designs in the Austrian Museum. In 1870, he became a teacher of ornamentation at the Royal Academy of Hanau, Germany. Then, from 1883 to 1888, he served as the director of the newly organized Industrial Art School of St. Gall in Switzerland, before moving back to Germany in 1889. Fischbach founded many societies for the advancement of industrial art, and through his work he exercised a great influence on textile designing in Germany. After he had died, in 1909, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City acquired his surviving collection of antique embroideries and fabrics. Towards the end of his life, Fischbach began publishing books on Nordic and Germanic mythology, including a particularly interesting little text where he discusses the runes, entitled The Origin of Gutenberg's Letters, in 1900. In his 44-page booklet, he uses his experience with textile ornamentation to explain his understanding of the runes and their religious origin. So, yes, he has a little bit of a Völkisch influence, which we'll see, but I would say it's not as strong as Guido von List, and it's got kind of its own flavor to it. So, this is paraphrasing from his text. There's some pictures there that he had in the back, some plates that he had in the back of his book. We'll look at them in just a sec. No matter how deeply the nature of the oldest runes have been understood, we're reading him now, or a translation of him. No matter how deeply the nature of the oldest runes have been understood, what has remained unclear is what their form, in and of themselves, express or mean as individual characters. People are too used to seeing letters only as spiritless characters. Thus, a preliminary explanation has to be done before an unraveling of the form of the runes will be possible. The famous German architect Gottfried Semper predicted in the 1850s that comparative ornamentation would one day become interrelated with comparative linguistic research. This would be possible as soon as there becomes a way to have an overview of the most important ornaments from all time periods and all countries. Semper emphasized that before scripts and figures existed, discoveries about the views and especially the religion of the ancients were accessible through their sacred symbolic ornaments. Sometimes we're highlighting the German words here in brackets. When Fischbach discovered the relationship of the old Peruvian textile ornaments with Oriental carpet patterns, he says he found the source, root, or cause in their common religious symbols, in the communion of ethical and religious perspectives based upon an imperishable concept. The assumption that, first of all, let me reread that sentence because it's very interesting. When Fischbach discovered the relationship of old Peruvian textile ornaments with Oriental carpet patterns, he says he found the source, root, or cause in their common religious symbols, in the communion of ethical and religious perspectives based upon an imperishable concept. The assumption that primitive geometric ornaments were only games of the imagination or ornamental forms of straight, curved, and crooked lines has to be rejected. He's saying that ornamental shapes are not just games, imagination games, because originally both form and concept were united in the most primitive way. For the ancients, religious concepts were directly connected with their forms of expression, including decorations found on items such as clothing, pottery, rugs, buildings, etc. Religious concepts were connected with their expression, their forms of expression, including on clothing, pottery, rugs, and buildings. The question that necessarily follows is, which religion or form of worship was the most common and widespread in ancient times? And Fischbach says, fire worship is indisputably the most prominent, even if animism is older. Animism is like worshiping animal kind of things. Fire worship. In the back of his booklet, he gives 16 plates as the proof of that these ornaments are, for the most part, to be traced back to devices for fire production. These devices in general are often referred to as the fire drill, and by using these primitive devices, the sacred fire is generated through rubbing, often via a spinning action. The spinning action used to create the sacred fire is symbolized in ornamental forms through spirals, interlaced or interwoven lines, as well as crosses, including spinning or rotating crosses, such as the well-known swastika. So this is an ancient symbol, according to this guy in the 1900s, who is a former, he worked at a museum, he studied design and rug, pottery, ancient design, and he had a lot of textiles in his collection in order to be able to reference that, because he taught in universities as well. He says that swastikas, that hook crosses or spinning crosses, which he gives examples of here, are the symbol of the spinning action used to create the sacred fire. Other related symbols that are shown in ornamental forms are the fire flower, which Fischbach equates with a palmette, or ornamental flower, and the fire bird. There's a fire bird here. Let's look at some more. These are just some of the plates, right? There's 16 plates. There's probably like 3 or 4 they were showing here. And it's got patterns that are showing a spinning action related with creating the sacred fire. So, he says that their methods of expression are connected to their religion, to their religious concepts. They were one and the same. So, now we're going to see what he says about their religion, religious symbols, religious symbolism, and religious concepts. From its simplest to its richest development, the Assyrian tree of life shows the fire drill with its twisting cords and the fire flowers which surround it. Another example, in Zoroastrianism, considered one of the world's oldest religions, the highest god, Ahura Mazda, hovers over the sacred fire. Fischbach believes that his explanation should indicate to us that all prior accounts of ornamentation were often mistaken. This is because those explanations did not begin with the religious concepts that created or originated the corresponding form, which is an expression of the religion. If we leave out the religion, we just look at the form, then we're missing it. We're missing the big picture. Just as someone who does not know Christianity may have difficulty grasping the symbolism of the Cologne Cathedral, we cannot solve the enigma of the world of forms, which the runes show us, if we do not start from the sacred, because in ancient times, religion and worship absolutely stood in the foreground. The proof is here for you to see, he says. The oldest runes grew from the same root as the oldest ornaments, fire worship. The runes, he says, are actually protection signs against demons and are found in connection with magic words and incantation signs. And that they become letters only about 3,000 years ago. Prior to that, they were used as protection signs against demons and connected with magic words and incantation signs. So that's why we didn't say anything about the question earlier, which was the person was wondering if sigils have any correlation. So I think you can see the correspondence there. Runes correspond to fundamental religious concepts. Let me read it to you again. Runes correspond to fundamental religious concepts, Fischbach says. And what has been emphasized with them is not beauty, but the best possible simplicity and abbreviation for their everyday use. This is why, he says, the runes have remained simple, suffering little alteration through time. Only a few strokes distinguish the 7 oldest runes, although it would have been easy to achieve a much richer alternation through geometric signs of various kinds. But again, people are too used to seeing letters only as spiritless characters. According to Fischbach, if we want to understand the runes, then we have to distinguish 3 epochs of their development and use. Number 1, the oldest or the earliest, in which the runes were only magic, divination, and protection characters. Then a middle period, in which the rune script characters developed, thereby becoming letters. And then finally, the youngest or the latest, in which they were supplemented in concurrence with the script characters coming from the east and the south. So kind of merged with letters, or what we would call letters. Originally, there were very few runes in use, and if these were not sufficient, then he says the earlier ones were changed just a little, or a new symbol rooted in religion was sought for. Hence the similarity of the 7 most sacred runes. This is just some of the material that he gives in his book. It was not profane games of form that created the 7 oldest runes, but veneration for the most holy and most blessed. These are the signs for fire, the primordial light, the thunderer, God, the fire wheel, the holy altar wood, or woods, plural, and the conjunction of those altar woods. The similarity of the runes is justified by Fischbach as originating from the veneration of the oldest religious symbols, those of fire worship. He says that we have to distinguish a sign from an image. A sign, as a symbol, only indicates, but does not depict, whereas an image is a depiction of something. Thus, the symbolic sign arises from a higher spiritual power rather than from the depiction of an object. He's a pretty intense writer. Intense sort of analysis. Runes are suggestive signs, whereas images, such as hieroglyphics, can be considered more depictive signs. If we look deeper, even the word, which is the sign to which the sign is dedicated, is a suggestion, a seed that awakens concepts. For Fischbach, the runes as suggestive signs arise from a higher spiritual force rather than from the depiction of an object, and therefore correspond to fundamental religious concepts. The runes as suggestive signs correspond to fundamental religious concepts. This means that for him, the runes are signs that are suggestive of the ethical and religious views related to fire worship. This is what he says. According to Tacitus, in his book Germania from 98 AD, Germanic tribes cut twigs or sprigs from fruit-bearing trees into sticks or staffs. They cut or carved signs into them, scattered them on a white cloth, and then picked them up in one of 2 ways. Either 3 sticks several times in a row, or several sticks over 3 consecutive days. Others say that they did not use fruit trees to make these sticks or staffs, but so-called holy trees, which have the hard wood necessary for the sacrifice. These holy trees are given as either beech, oak, and ash, or hazel, elder, and juniper. According to Fischbach, one cuts these rune sticks or staffs from the east-hanging branches, designating them through crosses, and they were distinctive black and white sticks. The runes were not magic formula in and of themselves, he tells us, since they became magical only through incantations or magic sayings. The runes became magic only through incantations or magic sayings. As we shall see, this means that sacred songs or chants and magic sayings are closely connected with the runes through alliteration, use of small phonetic sounds at the beginning of adjoining words. Thus, the stick from a holy tree, with a rune or runes carved upon it, became the rune staff, which may have also been a document or a record for verse and an alliterative rhyme, like a little poem. And this he calls a staff rhyme, like the particular rhyme or verse that was on a stick was called the staff or stick rhyme. Fischbach explains that it was very important that the rune conformed to the incantation or magic saying, be it for a blessing or for cursing, and that the staff rhyme repeated the initial sound to make the saying more powerful. So alliterative, if I'm not mistaken, is like, in English, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, so it'd be like using the same word or beginning of the word. Yeah, the same phonetic sound. In order to perform their healing functions, these sayings were invoked through a healing song. For divination, the oracle's proclamation was usually made by a staff rhyme, because the seer rhymed the alliterative runes. Just like the rune signs themselves, these rhymes had their origin in the religious concepts of fire worship, and may have also been used as a memory aid or mnemonic, which is a pattern of letters, ideas, or associations that assist to remembering something. Since these sayings allude to universal secrets, the trivial is excluded, and the path to the highest principles is laid out. Ancient Germanic poetry is thus closely related to the runes. Odin often gives the sayings and corresponding runes, and he sanctifies them through poetry. This is a picture of him. So now we're going to try and conclude what we've just talked about. For Fischbach, the runes were originally abbreviated religious symbols, which were only used as characters for magic, divination, and protection. Later, they came to be used to represent or be associated with sounds and syllables. So first they were magic characters. Then they were associated with sounds and syllables. These sounds and syllables were alliterative, so the beginning of the word or syllable rhymed, not the end of the word, but the beginning. Like we were saying, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. The beginning of the word rhymed. If we put together what Fischbach is saying regarding how the runes were used, then we can see the following key points. Number 1, the runes became magical only through incantations or magic sayings, but were not magic formula in and of themselves, which means that these magic sayings are important. The sacred songs and magic sayings are closely connected to the runes through alliteration. Number 3, the rune staff was used for associating poetic verse and alliterative rhyme into a staff rhyme. So, and that staff was associated with a rune or runes. So you're connecting together a little poem with the rune. The staff rhyme repeated the initial sound to make the saying more powerful. So the alliterative repetition of the sound gives some power. These rhymes had their origin in religious concepts. The religious concepts related to fire worship, which he says is like the original religion, and may have also been used as a memory aid or mnemonic, something to help us remember. These sayings allude to universal secrets and the path to the highest principles. Odin gives the sayings and the corresponding runes, and he sanctifies them through poetry. Incantations, magic sayings or songs, were used with the runes to make them magical. These used alliterative rhyme, repeating the initial sound of the corresponding rune in order to reinforce its attributes. These rhymes were often abbreviated on carved sticks or rune staffs, which may have served as memory aids for religious concepts that alluded to universal secrets. Right, we're just kind of repeating in a sentence form some of that stuff. So next, in the next class, we'll look at fire worship and gnosis, and then how Guido von List's influential influential 1906 article, The Magic or Secret of the Runes, and subsequent development of what he called the Kala, not Kabbalah, but basically it was like a runic Kabbalah. The Kala system seems to incorporate many of the same principles mentioned in Fischbach's 1900 booklet. Got a little supplement here for you, because he talked about the stick, the fire stick, right? And here we have, this is an old Masonic encyclopedia, The Mystery of the Gods, 1912. And this is from Alphonse Levy's History of Magic, 1860. You can see here the same design. There is a fire stick here in the center that's being turned by a snake. There's a turtle at the base of it. The turtle is a symbol of yin in the East, the yin. Then on top of the stick, there's like a flower. And then a person sitting in meditation style who has, let's say, 4 arms. We could say maybe related to the 4 elements, and holds symbols in their hand. And then here at the base of the stick for create the fire drill, fire borer, the snake is being pulled on both sides by different beings. So these are the handouts for today's class if you wanted to download them. But we want to open it up for questions and comments now if you have any. We want to invite you to the next class as well. We're not sure if we're going to be able to do it next week. We may have to put it off for 2 weeks into June. But we're here for you. You can always send us a message if you want to talk about something. But otherwise, we're going to definitely be continuing with the series. Because of lag, we have to buy ourselves a little time in case people have questions. They need to formulate them. Usually solid 30 to 45 seconds before the broadcast reaches you, depending on the internet speed and all that. But yeah, Fischbach he's different, man. He's different, and thanks to the internet we found and the translation program. Shout out to translation programmers making it so that we can copy and paste a sentence into a little program, and maybe it's not perfect. For the most part, they're not great, like perfect, great. They're good though. You can figure out what's being said, and you can kind of put it together, and that's what we did in order to understand his concepts. And you can see he's not a light read; he's heavy, and so thanks to that translation program, which was a DeepL, DeepL.com, excellent program. Well, all right. Doesn't look like there's any comments or questions at this time. So we'll wrap it up. If you do come up with some, feel free to leave them in the comments area, or to send us an email, gnosticstudies@gmail.com, and we'll go from there. In the meantime, we want to wish you the best in your esoteric work. Until next time.